teen beats stepfather to death for sexually abusing his sister. The Hill family's world was turned upside down the night Marcus Hill discovered his stepfather, Ron, molesting his younger sister, Jada. The Hill family had always seemed like a typical average family. They had their ups and downs, but they always stuck together. Marcus, a quiet but fiercely protective teenager, had always been there for his younger sister, Jada. Jada was only 13, still so young when their mother, Angela, remarried Ron. Angela had raised her children single-handedly for years after their father left. Despite the struggles, she always managed to keep them fed, clothed, and loved. But she wanted something more than she had. The years of being alone took its toll on Angela, who often worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Her children were her pride, but loneliness crept in during the quiet, cold nights. So when Ron entered her life, Angela felt she had found a partner who could help ease her burdens. Ron, a middle-aged man with a steady job in construction, seemed like the type who would bring stability and love to the household. And first, Ron's presence was a welcome change. He repaired things around the house, brought groceries, helped around the kitchen, and even offered to help Jada with her homework. For once, Angela believed she had finally found someone reliable, someone she could spend the rest of her life with. But what Angela only saw as acts of kindness, Marcus was unsure about Ron from the beginning. Marcus had always been protective of his little sister. Though he is only 17, he grew up fast, learning and trying to always be there for Jada. Marcus wasn't sure why Ron made him uneasy, but he couldn't ignore the creeping feeling that something was off about him. Ron's overly friendly behavior toward Jada and the family felt forced, unnatural, and somehow too good to be true. And in truth, the behavior was just the sort. At first, Marcus brushed it off, thinking he might just be overly sensitive or maybe just jealous of the new man in their lives. But as weeks turned into months, his suspicions grew. Ron's compliments toward Jada became more frequent, and his excuses to be around her grew more. He often found reasons to linger in her room or insist on helping her with tasks that didn't require help. To Marcus, Ron wasn't the kind of man who would bond easily with his new stepchildren. He seemed more distant, aloof, and more often than not, seemed angry or frustrated with Marcus's presence in the home. But Angela was in love, and Marcus wanted to believe everything would be fine. Marcus kept to his own, focusing on school and basketball, and keeping a low profile at home. But suddenly, Jada seemed off. Her once lively and bubbly personality began to fade. She became withdrawn. Her usual chatter and laughter was suddenly replaced by silence. Marcus noticed her hesitance to speak up, or even meet Ron's gaze. One night, Marcus overheard Jada sobbing softly in her room. But when he asked her what was wrong, she shrugged it off, saying she was just tired. It made her unhappy. She became very silent and was hesitant to speak. Jada seemed to spend more time in her room, alone with her toys, and when she did come out, it was only to grab something to eat. Marcus noticed that she would always seem nervous, as if something was wrong, as if something horrible and unimaginable was waiting to happen. As time went on, Jada began having trouble sleeping. There were times when she would wake up in the middle of the night, sobbing. When Marcus tried to talk to her about it, she would brush him off. "I'm fine, Marcus," she'd say, forcing a smile. But Marcus wasn't convinced. He knew something was off about his kid sister. He saw through it. He waded into the room and looked out the window. One evening, while Angela was working late, Marcus came home earlier than usual from basketball practice. He noticed Ron's car in the driveway, which was odd, because Ron was supposed to be working overtime. As Marcus entered the house, he heard hushed voices coming from Jade's room, who was leaving signs to go to bed before closing time. He entered the room and found Jade's face pressed up against the window. He made his way to Jada's room, but when he reached the door, he stopped. He could hear muffled sounds coming from inside. He froze at the sound of Jada's muffled sound. Rage and fear surged through him as he pushed the door open. What he witnessed made his blood run cold. "You seem to be enjoying the documentary," Subscribing to our channel gives you better access to more interesting ones just like this one. Ron was on top of Jada. His hands held her down as she struggled beneath him. Her face was pale and her eyes were filled with terror. She was scared. Ron was looming over Jada, his hands gripping her shoulders as she tried to push him away. Jada didn't scream. She just sobbed quietly, trying to push Ron off. Her hands were trembling, and Marcus could see the fear in her eyes. He felt so pained. Marcus didn't think. He grabbed Ron by the shirt and pushed him away from Jada. Ron stumbled back, cursing and threatening Marcus, but Marcus didn't even listen to him. He turned and screamed at Ron to leave. Jada broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. It took several minutes for Marcus to calm her enough to speak. With tears, she revealed the horrifying truth. Ron had been molesting her for months, using threats to keep her silent. Jada's confession pierced Marcus. He felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for not protecting her sooner. At that moment, everything inside him snapped. His heart pounded with a mix of anger and disbelief. That night, Marcus confronted his mother Angela with the truth, but instead of believing him, she accused him of exaggerating and trying to spoil her relationship. Ron denied everything, painting Marcus as a stupid and rebellious child who just hated his stepfather. Angela, desperate to keep Ron beside her with the hope of a stable family, sided with Ron. The following weeks were unbearable. Marcus tried to stay close to Jada, refusing to leave her alone with Ron. He skipped school and basketball practice, monitoring her every move. But Ron grew bolder, taunting Marcus. The final straw came on a cold Friday night. Angela was working a double shift, and Marcus had planned to stay up late, ensuring Ron couldn't get near Jada. But exhaustion overtook him, and he dozed off on the couch. He woke to Jada's screams. His heart pounding, Marcus grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door and ran to her room. What he saw was unbelievable. It made his vision blur with rage. Ron was forcing himself on Jada, his hand clamped over her mouth as she struggled beneath him. Marcus didn't hesitate. He swung the bat with all his strength, the impact sending Ron crashing to the floor. Ron tried to get up, but Marcus hit him again and again, each blow filled with suppressed anger and guilt. By the time Marcus stopped, Ron lay lifeless in a pool of blood. The room was eerily silent, except for Jada's sobs. Marcus dropped the bat, his hands shaking as he realized what he had done. He pulled Jada into his arms, whispering that everything would be okay, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. As they sat together in the silence of the room, Marcus's mind raced with what to do next. The situation was too much for him to handle alone. They needed help. They needed to tell someone what had happened. But even as he thought about calling the police, a sense of dread washed over him. What would they say? Would they believe him? Would they see it as an act of protecting his sister? Or would they see it as a murder? Should they try and retrieve the book from the altar, in the full knowledge of what was in it? Against his wishes? He lay down in the sun to rest his mind. They had to find something, he thought. It didn't take long before Marcus heard the front door open. His heart skipped a beat. His mother was home. Angela Hill walked into the house, her voice calling out for her children. When she stepped into the hallway, her voice trailed off as she saw the blood on the floor and the body of Ron lying in the corner. Her eyes widened in horror, and she took a step back, her hand onto her mouth in disbelief. "Oh my God, what happened?" Marcus didn't know how to explain. How could he explain? His mother had no idea what had been going on. She didn't know about the abuse. She didn't know about the torment Jada had been hiding from her. He felt a pang of guilt for not telling her sooner, but that didn't matter now. Marcus assured her mum that everything was fine and Jada was safe from him. Angela's face twisted in confusion and fear. "What do you mean? What's going on? What have you done?" Marcus explained to his mum what had been going on behind her back, how Ron abused and took advantage of Jada. The realization hit Angela like a slap in the face. Her eyes opened wide and she collapsed onto the couch, her hands trembling as she tried to process the shock. "Oh my God," All this time, I didn't know. How could I not know? She murmured, her voice breaking. Marcus felt a mixture of emotions: anger, confusion, guilt, and relief, but most of all, he felt the overwhelming weight of what had just happened. He had killed his stepfather, but it wasn't just any death. It was the death of a man who had taken so much from his family, a man who had caused immeasurable harm to his sister. Yet, beneath that feeling of relief, Marcus couldn't escape the feeling that his actions, no matter how justified they might seem, would have consequences. Angela sat in stunned silence, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't bring herself to voice. She was conflicted. A part of her wanted to defend her son, to tell him that he had done the right thing by ending that nightmare. But another part of her, one that had been so blinded by her love for Ron, couldn't bring herself to fully comprehend the magnitude of what had just happened. The air in the house was thick with tension. Jada was still sitting on the bed, looking as though she had seen a ghost. She was physically there, but emotionally she had retreated into herself. Marcus could see the toll it had taken on her, the trauma, the fear, the years of suffering behind closed doors. She wasn't the same girl she had been before. Jada was physically there, but she had been unreal as she had never been before. Marcus knew he had to protect his sister, no matter what. "I'm going to call the police, Mum," he said, standing up. "But you need to know, Jada didn't deserve this. None of this was her fault." Angela nodded, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her son. Marcus didn't know what would happen next. He only knew that, at that moment, his family would never be the same. When the police arrived, their eyes immediately went to Ron's lifeless body. There was no denying what had happened. The evidence was right there: blood, a baseball bat, and a terrified mother and sister. Marcus could see their reactions as they took in the scene, their faces inscrutable, but their eyes filled with judgment. He didn't know what they were thinking, but he could feel their questions hanging in the air, questions that he didn't have the answers to. One of the officers approached Marcus. He was a tall man, his face hard but not unkind. "Are you the one who called?" he asked, his voice calm but serious. Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, I need to explain. I didn't mean for this to happen, but he was hurting my sister, and I couldn't let him do it anymore." The officer didn't respond immediately. He simply looked at Marcus, as if weighing his words. Then he turned to his partner, giving a subtle nod. "Get a statement from him," the officer said, as the second officer started to write down notes. Marcus was led into the living room, where his mother, Angela, was sitting. She had stopped crying, though the lines on her face were a reflection of the emotional toll the situation had taken. The police asked her questions, but Marcus couldn't bring himself to listen to the conversation. He wasn't ready for what was coming. Jada remained in her room, refusing to come out. She had been silent since the police arrived, and Marcus couldn't blame her. Her world had been shattered, and there was nothing he could say or do to take away the pain. He could only hope that, somehow, somewhere, she would find the strength to heal. Hours passed. The police took their statements, asked their questions, and searched the house for evidence. By the time they left, the gravity of the situation had fully hit Marcus. Their house, which was once a peaceful home, was now a crime scene. The evidence was undeniable. Ron had been killed, and Marcus was the one responsible. The next few days passed. Marcus was interviewed by detectives, his words documented, and his actions analyzed. They asked him the same questions over and over again, trying to make sense of what had happened, and his responses to their questions generated information for the book. He told them everything, from the abuse he had suspected and witnessed, the confrontation, and his fear for Jada's safety. He didn't hide his guilt, but he didn't deny the truth either. He did what he had thought was necessary to protect his sister, but he had taken a life. There was no easy way to explain it. Angela struggled with her own emotions. She had known Ron for years. She loved him. She trusted him. How could she not have seen what was happening? The shame and guilt that weighed on her were crushing. She couldn't understand how she had let this happen under her roof, but undoubtedly she was proud of her son. She knew that Marcus had acted out of love. He had done what any brother would do to protect his family. She tried to convince herself of that, but the legal realities of what had happened were too overwhelming for her to ignore. The weeks after the incident were a nightmare for everyone. There was a funeral for Ron, though no one in the Hill family felt the need to mourn. It was a strange and uncomfortable affair. No one knew how to behave or how to grieve for a man who had caused so much pain. After that, the community rallied around the Hill family, gossips and rumors flying around. Some people whispered about the tragedy, unsure of what to believe. Was it an act of self-defense? Was it just a crime? Or was it something more? Angela made sure that Marcus had a lawyer, a competent one, she hoped. But even as she sat in meetings with legal professionals, she couldn't shake the feeling that the law wouldn't understand the circumstances. He was just a teenager, but what he had done could carry consequences far beyond what he could understand. Exercise. Jada, meanwhile, was growing more distant. She hadn't spoken to Marcus much since the night of Ron's death. She hadn't spoken to anyone, not even their mother. Months passed, and the court proceedings began. Marcus's lawyer argued that his actions had been driven by a need to protect his sister, a defense rooted in the truth of the abuse that had taken place. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They argued that Marcus had acted recklessly, that his actions had been impulsive and violent, and that they couldn't be justified by the situation at hand. The Hill family's tragedy sparked heated debates about justice, morality, and the failures of the system. Many saw Marcus as a hero, a young man forced to take extreme measures to protect his sister. Others condemned his actions, arguing that no one had the right to take a life, regardless of the circumstances. As the trial progressed, Marcus found himself facing a terrifying reality. He was being asked to explain what had been going through his mind during that fateful night, to justify his actions in the eyes of a jury who had no real understanding of the hell that he and Jada had been living through. He found it difficult to articulate his pain, to explain how deeply he had felt the need to protect his sister. All he could do was recount the events as they had unfolded, but it wasn't enough. His words couldn't undo what had happened. Kelly's writings seemed to transcend nature, but the truth was more complicated than the headlines. In court, Jada bravely took the stand, her small voice shaking as she recounted the abuse she had endured. The room was silent as she described the years of fear, the nights she spent crying herself to sleep, and the terror she felt whenever Ron was near. Eventually, the jury reached a verdict. Marcus was found guilty of manslaughter, not murder. The judge considered the circumstances, the abuse Jada had suffered, and the fact that Marcus had acted out of a desperate need to protect his sister. The sentence wasn't as harsh as it could have been, but it was still a sentence, a reminder that, no matter how justifiable the actions might have seemed at that moment, the law had its way of interpreting the world. Marcus was sent to a juvenile detention center, and the world he once knew slipped further into the past. It would be years before he would be able to leave the confines of the system, and even longer before he could begin to heal from the scars that had been left on his soul. For Jada, the healing process was slower. She's been going to therapy sessions. The memories of what had happened, of the years of abuse, were not something that could be erased easily. She, too, was forced to confront her trauma in unimaginable ways. But with time, and with the support of a therapist who understood the depth of her pain, Jada began to reclaim pieces of herself. When she was completely healed, she says, she turned to meditation to re-listen to the memories that had originated in her waking states. The Hill family would never be the same. The house, once a place of warmth and laughter, was now haunted by the ghosts of their past. The hidden truths that had been buried for so long were now exposed, and with them came unimaginable horrors. But through it all, Marcus and Jada found a way to survive. The bond between them, though strained, was still there, and despite the pain, they knew one thing for certain: They had each other. And that was enough. The Hill family's tragedy left a lasting impact on their community. It was a painful reminder of the importance of vigilance, compassion, and the need for better resources to protect vulnerable children. And though their scars would never fully heal, the Hill family found strength in each other, determined to turn. If you want to be part of the conversation, to explore the hidden truths of our world, subscribe to our channel and stay with us. We'll see you next time.